A UK-based war monitor says Syrian opposition fighters are closing in on the city of Hama and have it surrounded on 3 sides. The advance comes despite a counteroffensive launched by government forces to hold the city. The rebels have already taken Syria's second-largest city, Aleppo, in the lightning offensive. Hama may be an even bigger prize, located just 200 kilometers from the capital, Damascus.
The 8-day rebel campaign has moved at a breathless pace, overrunning Syrian army positions with apparent ease. The Islamist-led opposition moved so quickly, it appears government troops dashed from their quarters in a matter of minutes, leaving valuables of all kinds behind. Thank God, after 6 or 7 years, God helped us prosper and we returned with honor and respect. And we return to our families with honor, with God's will, and we are no more with this dog, Assad, this pig. This is the first rebel offensive in years against President Bashar al Assad's military, the first shift in the front lines, noted by the U.S. Secretary of State.
Assad's key backers, key allies, whether it's Russia, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Iran, have all, in different ways, been distracted. Notably by problems of their own making. And it looks like HTS took advantage of that fact.
The resistance to the opposition, HTS, in the city of Hama is significant. Assad's army, its career soldiers bolstered by a sudden 50% increase in pay, is holding. Overhead, Russian fighter jets find targets of their choosing. In this case, journalists covering the conflict were fired on.
Anas!
Photographer Anas Al-Karbutli of the German Press Association was killed in the attack. He was buried in a nearby cemetery. One of more than 100 civilians believed killed in the renewed fighting.
Anna Borshchevskaya is an analyst at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. She's also the author of Putin's War in Syria, Russian Foreign Policy and the Price of America's Absence. Anna, welcome to the day. It's great to see you. Now, how much can Russia afford to invest in the defense of Bashar al Assad at this time?
Thanks very much for having me. The question you ask is really the key one. How much can Russia invest? The answer is, well, it certainly has some resources to invest into Syria. In other words, Russia is resource constrained because of its war in Ukraine, but it is not yet desperate. And the Syria operation, from the very beginning, by the Kremlin's own design, was always limited. It was meant to be limited. So in theory, the Kremlin has some assets, air assets it can give to Assad. The question is, how long is this going to go? What will be the logistics involved? That there's so many unforeseen potential consequences. And so the short answer is yes, they have something to give, but how much will it matter? And that remains to be seen. Certainly, I would say Putin's credibility here is on the line right now.
All right. And does the fact that the militants were able to capture Aleppo so quickly, that's Syria's second biggest city, doesn't that show that Moscow really is unable to help Assad?
Well, it certainly is a setback. It's a major setback. Really, it's a stunning reversal when you think about what has happened in Syria in the last several days, right? The Assad's capture of Aleppo with Russia's and Iranian help in 2016 was a major turning point of the war back then in Assad's favor. So it is certainly a big setback for Russia. But the fact of the matter is they have recalibrated. They have reiterated that they will support Assad, and they did start an air campaign. So again, the story is not yet over.
Mm-hmm. To what extent do you think the current advance by those militants poses a threat to overall Russia's strategic foothold in Syria?
It poses a degree of threat again. Russia's presence, again, was always limited by design. Russia wanted to have a presence on the Eastern Mediterranean, a military presence, and that is limited to that Mediterranean coast. If we can foresee a potential situation where those militants attack Russia's bases, Russia will fight back. But I think really the main question is, the main issue is that we're not quite there yet. I would look at the situation more from a broader, sort of take a more of a broad view of Russia here. And that is, Russia remains embroiled in a larger war with the West, right? And that war is playing out in Ukraine, and it is playing out in Syria. But Ukraine is a bigger priority for Russia. If Russia loses a position in Syria, it would certainly represent a strategic defeat, of sorts. The bigger game of its war with the West and in Ukraine will continue.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at how we got here. What is behind this success for the Islamist groups in Syria? Is it simply because Assad supporters in the region and around the globe are tied up in conflicts elsewhere?
Well, the way we got here, and specifically in these last several days, is that Assad's backers have been weakened, and that is Russia was distracted in Ukraine. More importantly, Hezbollah has suffered a major defeat. Israel has signed a ceasefire, and nature abhors a vacuum. Once Assad's backers have shown themselves to be at a weak spot, somebody else was going to step in. And what that shows us, again, from a big picture perspective, is first how unstable Syria truly is and has been, despite a relative peace in sort of cessation of fighting in recent years. First, how unstable Syria really has been. Second, how reliant Assad has been on his external backers. At the moment they loosened their grip, somebody else had stepped in. And I would say third is the degree to which both Russia and Iran contribute to instability in the Middle East and how far that reverberates.
Mm-hmm. The U.S. still has a mission in Iraq. It's currently winding down. From there, they're also monitoring advances from the Islamic State in Syria. There's about 900 troops from the U.S. still stationed in Syria. What effect do you expect the end of that U.S. mission in Iraq to have on the situation in the region?
Well, it's a signal. If the U.S. withdraws, it is a signal to the rest of the region that the United States once again is reducing its presence, and if that happens, it's also a signal for others to potentially to step in, potentially become more aggressive, and that really again brings us to the bigger issue of whose influence in the Middle East genuinely brings stability. And I would argue it's more American presence rather than Russian and Iranian presence.
Where is Syria on Donald Trump's list of priorities then?
Syria does not appear to be very high on Donald Trump's list of priorities in a sense of staying there. In other words, I unfortunately do not expect Trump to remain committed to keeping American presence in Syria. And again, that potential withdrawal would likely only be a harbinger of greater instability, not only in Syria, but really across the region. Syria has stopped being about Syria many years ago. It is essentially a failed state. And what you see is other powers, greater and regional powers, vying for influence in this country. And unfortunately, as we've seen, especially with Russia and Iran, they're not looking for stability. They're not looking for genuine peace.
What was Russia's interest in Syria all along?
Russia's interest in Syria from the very beginning was about the United States. Prior to invading Ukraine, Syria represented the largest playground where Russia contested the United States for influence. It was looking to challenge the U.S. liberal global order. It was looking to essentially thumb its finger in the eye of the West. And to that end, it was looking to establish a military presence in Syria, a limited military presence, as we had seen. But really, Syria was never about Syria for Russia. It was always about the West. It was always about undermining the West. And it was never about genuine peace. Russia never had any desire or ability to bring genuine peace or stability to this country.
This is Anna Borshchevskaya of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Fascinating insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.